and welcome everyone to our California Cabernet tasting this evening. My name is Mark. I'm the head buyer for United Cellars, and I'll be hosting this event alongside my esteemed compatriots. My buyer over in New Zealand is Tirangi, the man waving, and then across the pond, over in the UK, is our friend Alistair Cooper, who's a master of wine.
Hello, good morning, good evening, everybody. Nice.
Good morning, good evening.
Good morning, good evening, and everything in between.
Excellent. So thank you for joining us, gents, and thank you to all of our customers who have come along this evening. Now, today we're going to talk about a topic that is that both Ali and I must admit, it's not our absolute, it's not our home base. It's not something that we know incredibly well. So I know that I've had quite a bit of fun doing a bit of research into the wines of California and Cabernet in particular. And from my perspective, obviously you've picked up that my accent is Australian. I'm based in Australia. And in Australia, Californian Cabernet is actually incredibly, it's hard to find. It's really hard to find. I know it's a lot easier for you over in New Zealand, but in Australia, it's really hard to find. How is it in your market, in the UK market, Ali?
It's a good question, and I'd be interested to see why it's bigger in New Zealand actually. But over here, until about, I reckon 8 years ago, it was quite difficult. There was a lot of, prices of California Napa Cabernet specifically went through the, they were very expensive because the Americans were prepared to pay a lot of money for them, and over here in the UK, it's a very Bordeaux-centric. Historically, so people, it was difficult to get people to spend the equivalent money or more on a Californian wine when they could be buying a first growth or a second growth Bordeaux. So, we've got a long history with Bordeaux. So it was really quite difficult. You had to go to specialist shops. But then actually about 9 years ago, there was a real movement. I think because we had a lot of American businessmen over here who wanted to find their wines in London restaurants. And actually now it's pretty easy to find some of the top Californian wines over here. So it's changed a lot. And there's been, California, not just Cabernet, but California generally has had a big resurgence at all price points over here over the past 10 years. So it's a lot easier now than it used to be. And I can see why in New Zealand is it easier than in Australia to find them.
I was going to say that I think we're kind of following in the UK trend, but a few years behind, like per normal, where we definitely, a lot of people are focused on those French Bordeaux blends, the Cabernet heavy dominant styles, and then New Zealand started producing these awesome Bordeaux blends, your guys over in Te Mata, your guys on Waiheke Island, Matakana, what have you. And then, the chains started bringing in these big, jammy, cheap American Cabernets. And then I think people started going, well, they make a cheap version of a Cabernet. Well, there must be some good stuff. And so we started working closely with some exclusive importers. And these three wines that we're tasting tonight are all exclusive to UC NZ. Just trying to educate people more and get them away from just drinking what they're used to, maybe, and trying something a little different.
I think that's a great point, T. And one reason I know for a fact as to why it's not worked in Australia, it's very similar to what you were saying, Ali. It's when for you guys, when you've got Bordeaux on your doorstep, why would you look to the wines of America? For us, it's more, we've got the wines in our background, in our backyard, sorry. So we grow so much Cabernet in Australia. Obviously Coonawarra Cabernet is fairly famous. Margaret River Cabernet is very famous. Everywhere in between grows Cabernet as well. There's a large volume of Cabernet easily available in Australia. So why would we pay more for a foreign wine that's not as good as a local one? So for us, it's really struggled to gain anything.
I mean, would you say it's
something from the wines? Sorry, the Australian wines coming into New Zealand, especially that top end stuff, they're limiting more and more what allocation New Zealand is allowed to have. So we are having to look further afield than just getting the American, the big names that we're all used to seeing. So we do have to look further afield to California and America.
And then just a question, Mark, would you say it's fair to say, I mean, we can talk a bit about this later, but Cabernet generally, I think, has become maybe a little bit less trendy. It's become sort of a slightly old-fashioned grape variety for many people. Would you say in Australia as well? I mean, I'm a Cabernet freak, so I'm one of the different ones of being wine geeks. But would it be fair to say in Australia as well, people have turned more towards Shiraz than Cabernet? So Cabernet's maybe a little bit tired, and Shiraz is more exciting in Australia as well.
So, first of all, I must say I'm definitely with you. I'm a Cabernet nut myself. It is my single favourite red grape. But it's quite the opposite, Ali. So we're not in Australia. We're not seeing a growth towards Shiraz, which is our most grown grape here in Australia. It's actually away from both Shiraz and Cabernet styles, and moving more towards lighter, so Pinot Noir and lighter Grenache as well, or white Grenache. So I think it's less about Cabernet the grape itself. It's more about the style that Cabernet becomes in Australia, which tends to be high alcohol, incredibly big and thick and round. So, yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, I think that's 10 minutes. We're down already, and we haven't even got started here. So hopefully our customers here, our lovely customers, have got their wines all poured. I think I can see we've already got some wines poured in glasses, and we're all ready to go. Beautiful. And before we got onto the specific wines, I thought I'd just give you guys a really brief an overview of a history of wine in California, because it really seriously has had quite a checkered past, to say the least. It really is the story of California, not just in the wine industry, but in general, really, is about booms and busts. And I mean, that would still be today. So, I mean, but very, very basically, so Franciscan monks planted the first vines in 1770, and that was mainly used for the sacrament. Christianity was obviously very, very popular in California, and especially as Mexico took the majority of California. During the gold rush, it started in 1849. There was a large increase for alcohol. There's a large desire for alcohol as the gold miners came in, took the money out of the ground, and then spent it on everything they could, including lots and lots and lots of alcohol. So huge amounts of production of wine started then, and that boom then hit fever pitch when phylloxera destroyed 99% or thereabouts of the vines in Europe, starting from kind of the 1860s and throughout the 1870s and 1880s. So there was basically, the majority of Europe was brought to its knees, and California had started growing a lot of grapes. So a lot of that started finding its way back to Europe, and it really started this enormous boom in California. That boom turned into an enormous bust upon the introduction of the Volstead Act, also known as Prohibition, in 1920. And then it was not until, and only a handful of wineries survived that. A lot of wineries went the way of the dodo. And in 1933, when it was repealed, after a lot of soldiers came back from serving in World War II and wanted to have a glass of beer or wine with their dinner, when it was repealed, that meant that several wineries started to grow again, and the industry kind of started again. And that's where we find ourselves today. So today California is responsible for about 90% of the USA's production, which is obviously the lion's share. Every state produces wine, but California is by far the largest producer, hence why we're focusing on her today. So a little map of California here just to get started. And T, I might hand over to you, and I'm actually going to show a screen. I'm going to show you my screen, which has got a Google map of where we're going to go, where we're going to visit today. So T, if you wouldn't mind just running us through the wine, the first wine.
Yeah, sure. So the first wine is the Lapis Luna. Sorry, my bottle's just gone walking. The Lapis Luna Cabernet Sauvignon. This is a family-owned and operated winery. It was actually two brothers who started this, Andrew and Evan. And the story that they told us, at least, is that they would go traveling with their parents to places like France, where they were allowed to drink alcohol, because they were over 18, but they went back to the States and they were under 21 and they couldn't drink alcohol. So they started experimenting, they started making moonshine or whatever they were calling it. And they've kind of grown there into going and sourcing really good quality fruit and trying to make the best quality wine they can for a reasonable price. They're young guys. They're not, they're not about spending £400 on a per bottle kind of basis. And so they're based over in Lodi, up in kind of the north coast of California. And for a long time, Lodi was just known for growing grapes and selling it off. They've got some of the oldest wines of a few different red varietals there, and they grow hundreds of different varietals. But yeah, for a very long time, they were just known as growers of grapes and selling it off to some of the bigger guys down in Napa and California and what have you. And I'm thinking about in the early 90s, there was only a handful of wineries there. So yeah, you can see them on the map there now. They're kind of quite a fair way up away from San Diego and Los Angeles and what have you.
Sorry to interrupt
early 90s, there was only about 5
Sorry, can you guys see the Google screen that I've put up here, or is it still on the main you can see it?
It's on California. It's on California, yeah.
Yeah. And from between the 1990s to about now, it's exploded as a region that can produce really good quality to go up against the guys in Napa that kind of had all the fame. I think from about 5 or 10 back in the early 90s, it's at least 80 decent wineries that have made a bit of a name for themselves. So this wine, like I said, family owned and operated. It's about 5% of it has been on new oak and about 15% on 1-year-old oak. It's really quite full bodied, especially for the price. And it's got these really beautiful kind of autumnal blueberry flavors, a little bit of cherry spice. And really easy to drink, but also kind of over delivers for the price which it is at. And the other thing, just before I forget, is a lot of people ask about the labels, the logos that they use, the pictures, and all that imagery is from about 400-year-old copper plate presses. So yeah, they've taken a lot of care and effort on creating this label. It's quite cool.
How unfortunately, I couldn't get these wines. They're very specific, and obviously they're exclusives that you guys have got there. So, but in my experience, I've had Lodi as an area known for Zinfandel. Historically, that's been the king of the grapes there. But there has been, and it's a really interesting region actually. It's very warm, and there's all sorts of beautiful old vines. And as you said, I think they've got the oldest Cinsault vines in the world. You said they've got some of the oldest vines, the oldest Cinsault vineyard.
Aglianico, something like this as well.
Yeah, very old Aglianico as well. And I have had a little bit of experience. I haven't been to Lodi, but I have had a bit of experience with some Cabernets there over the recent years. And I have found that in the past 8-9 years, the general quality of Lodi, there's been a real emphasis actually on Cabernet, and I've seen the quality increase. So how's this one tasting? I've always found that they're powerful wines, and they always used to be very powerful wines, but they've dialed in that power over the past few years, and it'd be interesting to see if this one has there is that blue fruit, earthy fruit, and the alcohol's there, but they've tamed it quite a lot for such a hot region. Is this one as well quite an elegant style?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely, I think the region as a whole is trying to step back from Napa and California Cabernets as being these big, bold, knock you out kind of wines. But while still having those kind of that hot characteristic, they are really refined and got this, like you said, this blue fruit comes through this wine beautifully with this nice kind of almost mocha earthy tannin to the finish. It was really, really good. Beautiful food wine as well, obviously.
Yeah, it's great. As you say, all the emphasis when people talk about California is Napa, 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 Napa. And it's been great to see actually, I was talking to some people who worked there for many, many years, that it used to be regarded, in the middle of the Central Valley as just being the bulk wine kind of area, the Riverina or whatever it may be, the equivalent in Australia. And there's been a real movement and a movement towards these old vineyards and towards higher quality. So for me, I've found that some of the best bargains of California have been coming from Lodi, and especially a move towards Cabernet. So it's good to see that you guys have got your hands on some of that.
And with this range, yeah, we did also bring in a Zinfandel from Lodi. We brought in a red blend and a Chardonnay as well. And Andrew has gone and selected different parcels from around all of California. But yeah, obviously, like you said, the Zinfandel does come from Lodi, and the red blend uses some of that Zin as well into it.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So one thing I just wanted to point out here from my perspective, I've had the great pleasure of driving through Lodi. It's a beautiful, beautiful part of the world. Drove from Sacramento down to Palo Alto. So it's one of the few places where it's similar to Napa in the sense that it has it's very, very greatly influenced by San Francisco Bay. So if you'll just see on this image that I've got up here, the reason I've gone out so far is you can see that a lot of kind of just to the west of San Francisco, it's quite mountainous and it looks quite dry, and it really is quite dry there. But as you get into this section around Antioch and through Discovery Bay, you see it gets much, much, much greener, and there's quite a lot of lovely fresh water that comes in through there. And a lot of it comes down from the San Andreas Mountains, just up to the kind of northeast of this area, and it is kind of like a bit of a food bowl, this area, and it's quite hot, of course. But one of the things that's made Napa famous is this kind of morning fog that sits along San Francisco, and it kind of travels up through Napa and keeps the area quite protected for a while. And you do actually see quite a bit of that in Lodi as well, not to the same extent as Napa, because Napa is obviously much closer to San Francisco Bay, but Lodi definitely does get a little bit of that cooling influence that comes through off the bay. So it's quite well placed. And I remember when I was there, I did try a few wines, stopped at a few wineries, and I was genuinely impressed by, I had been to Napa several days before, and I was kind of thinking, this is punching quite well above its weight for the money. It was really, really doing quite well. So yeah, it was a great pickup.
I think it's hard to actually overestimate the effect of that cooling breeze that comes in. And when I was there, I was always just so shocked when you look at the temperatures. You can be in San Francisco and it will be 20 degrees, and then you look at the Napa temperatures or Yountville a bit further up there, and it can be up to 15 degrees warmer, and you're probably 15 miles as the crow flies. It's astonishing the effect of that cool breeze. It's hard to overestimate it, really. But how's everyone finding this wine? I'd be interested to hear some thoughts. Anyone want to add any comments?
Any of the UC team? Anyone wants to?
They all have their mouths full. They're enjoying.
We'll have their mouths full of Lapis Luna Cabernet.
Yeah. Be busy drinking.
Okay, so let's. I thought I'd just put a little. Go to this next page here, and we'll just do a quick discussion on while you guys pour yourselves the second wine, which is what we're up to now. We'll just have a quick big back and forth from kind of three corners of the world, from New Zealand, Australia, and the UK, about Cabernet. And the one thing that has to be absolutely mentioned when we're talking about Cabernet, when we're talking about Californian Cabernet, of course, is we've put just here the Judgment of Paris. This concept of the Judgment of Paris. It's back in 1976, a very, very famous event that took place where he was Stephen Spurrier, he's a Brit, isn't he, Ali?
Stephen's English, yeah, he's British, and he was running a wine school in France, Académie du Vin at the time in Paris. So he organised the Judgment of Paris. That's right.
And it was a very famous, held in Paris, and he invited some quite influential winemakers and journalists, and he did a completely blind tasting of Bordeaux Cabernet and Napa Cabernet that he had imported himself, and total blind tasting, and he kept all of the scores and notes on everything, and I believe, Napa Cabernet was the winner and it was up against some pretty impressive names. I think it was up against Chateau Latour and Chateau Mouton Rothschild.
I think they were all in there, weren't they? Lafitte,
Oh,
Latour,
potentially,
Mouton, Haut-Brion, pretty much,
Yeah.
and some of the top ones.
I think you're right. So the absolute the absolute pinnacle of Cabernet in the world was up against that, and some backwater Napa Cabernets took the gong. So I believe they not only came first, but also came first and second. So yes,
yeah, I think they certainly outdid them in quite considerably. And yeah, it was. And at the time, Californian Cabernet and Bordeaux really wasn't on anyone's radar at all. Not globally. So it really was a massive upset. And one of the key things, as you say, for catapulting Californian Cabernet and Californian wines generally forward.
Absolutely. So historically, from an ampelographer point of view, the parents of Cabernet are Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon Blanc. So a red and a white. So hence why it's called Cabernet Sauvignon. It's got both parents. And that's where you get, for me, the Cabernet elements, the Cabernet Franc elements I get from it are the dark blackberry, the black currant, those kind of currant elements. And then I always get within good Cabernet, you always get a little bit of that, of kind of a minty, slightly leafy tomato bush element. And that for me is kind of the parentage of Sauvignon Blanc coming through. So just as a quick tasting profile. So we are on to our...
Yeah, a lot of people will say that you...
Go for it, mate.
I was just going to say, a lot of people, when they're talking about Cabernet Sauvignon, that you do get these green characteristics come from that Sauvignon Blanc, the mintiness or the eucalyptus, or depending on where in the world it comes from. But yeah, it's definitely prevalent in a lot of Cabernets.
Yeah, it's probably important to say. Actually, Jancis Robinson just tweeted something the other day about the most planted grape varieties in the world, and Cabernet Sauvignon is still the most planted grape variety in the world. Merlot second, and Tempranillo, interestingly enough, is third from Spain. But there's a reason Cabernet is the most planted variety. It is an international variety. It does well in so many different soil types. So certain grapes are very specific and site specific. Think of Pinot Noir for one. Cabernet can thrive in many different climates, which is why it's become an international grape variety. Its home of Bordeaux is probably the most northern limit, or the limit of where it ripens. It's a late ripening grape variety. It's very hardy. And Bordeaux, that's why it does well in warm climates. It can't do that well in cooler climates. And it is the world's most widely planted grape variety, and I think one of the finest. But as we said, it's fallen out of favour with all the cool kids. They want more, and actually, in many ways, it's responsible for you could call it a colonizer, really, Cabernet Sauvignon. So it was planted all over the world at the expense of quite a lot of indigenous grape varieties, which were ripped up. So it's sort of it does upset people in some ways because it's kind of it's taken over a little bit. But when it's done well, it can be done. It is a beautiful grape variety, but it has taken over all sorts of parts of the world.
Awesome. Now, just a bit of feedback from our customers here. So Liz has said, easy to consume, quite sweet compared to New Zealand, Australia. I completely agree with that. I totally see what you're tasting there. I get that real plush sweet fruit character in it, definitely. Mike said, lovely texture, hides the alcohol well. That's also very true. And good. Then, yeah, it's very good, yeah. And then the UCNZ office, refined and elegant, feminine, less brutish when compared to an Australian one. And that's definitely a fair comment to make as well. So with that, we're going to move on to, I'm just being aware of the time, we will move on to our next wine, which is the Noble Vines 337. And you right?
So winemaker for this is James Hewitt, who is Australian, but working over stateside for quite a while now. Winemaker for things like Delicato and Gnarly Head and some wines that you may or may not have seen around the place. With this wine, he's tried to do something with this range. Actually, he's tried to do something quite interesting that we'll get into a little bit more after this slide, where he's using specific grape vine clones. So this wine here, he's called the Noble Wines 337, and that's from a specific clone that I'm sure Mark and Ali can talk about more later on. But this is more about being, again, it's from Lodi. It's about being still nice and rich and flavorful without having to sacrifice any balance, like not having that hot alcohol like Mike was saying earlier, and not being too jammy. So it's got some American oak and some French oak in it. Real beautiful balance. On the nose, it's like a nice purple, kind of like a purple grape and a blackberry flavor that I get. More like a soft redwood spice. And then on the palate, yeah, very, very soft, and builds up gradually into this kind of, like a nice jammy compote without being like overly jammy, but something really quite plush.
And T, that basically, I mean, for me, that if I was to do a dry tasting note on California Cabernet, that would absolutely be it. Fruit would be at the fore, most definitely. Oak always plays a role, I find, in Californian wines, be they red or white or whatever variety they are. Oak definitely plays a role, and yeah, that ripe fruit character, black currant, a little bit of that kind of compote jam character, most definitely is what I'm getting there. The alcohol again is like quite noticeable, but it's not crazy. What was that, sorry, mate?
Like a peppercorn spice on the finish, like a pink peppercorn or something. So it's not overpowering on that oak side, which is really nice to see.
Yeah.
And in comparison, so is this from Lodi as well? It is, isn't it? Okay. Mm-hmm. And in comparison to the two, how are they? What would you say the different stylistically is between the two of them?
Guys,
we're thinking the Noble Vines is like slightly less sweet and a little bit more kind of got a bit more spice going on.
A bit more complex.
Yeah, it is. So they're saying, a bit more complex, a little bit less kind of playful, a little bit more serious, a little bit more complex.
A bit more refined, a bit more elegant, a bit more.
Yeah. I think that is an absolutely perfect segue. I think that goes down to basically the core, the heart of what the name of this wine is, the 337 Noble Vines collection. So that brings me perfectly to our next page here on clones. So this wine has a specific clone has been chosen to be grown in this specific climate in order to get the best possible result from that. So as Ali mentioned, Cabernet, it is grown in a wide variety of regions, but it definitely prefers warmer climates. That being said, I know it also likes quite a bit of soil, water, and moisture. It doesn't like drought in any way. So you need to be careful with where you're planting it. And one of the best ways for a winemaker, or a viticulturalist, I should say, to ensure that you're getting the best results is to plant clones. Now, clones is something that when I think about when I'm talking about clones, I would usually be talking about most likely Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir clones, there's been a huge amount of interest and study done into Pinot Noir clones, and more into Nebbiolo clones is also quite interesting throughout the northwest of Italy. However, Cabernet clones is something that there's more and more interest in. So, Ali, would you mind giving us a bit of kind of your 10 cents on what clones, what kind of the usefulness of studying clones would be?
Yeah, and I won't go. It's a really geeky subject, so I won't,
Yeah.
I won't go too deeply into it because obviously. But first of all, I think the word clone. When you think of the word clone, actually, it can conjure up images of petri dishes, and you're trying to clone something. You know, that's not what a clone is. Actually, it's not like a crossbreed grape variety that is made in a lab. It is literally, essentially, how it started was you look at your vineyard. A grower could look at his vineyard, and he might see specific vines that are doing very well for certain reasons. So you've got one vine where around it has suffered from some rot, or it's suffered from drought, or it's suffered from whatever it may be, but one particular vine has done well. So they will then clone, they will take a cutting from that grape variety and reproduce it for its inherent specific capabilities. Just like, you know, certain human beings, we have, you know, certain people can fight diseases or don't fall down with certain things. So these clones then get, you know, repeated, and nurseries will look at a clone like 337, which, you know, produces these small berries, etc., and has characteristics. If you speak to winemakers, clones are a very divisive thing, because there's two ways of looking at it. One, you can have a greater control of what you're looking for. So you may, as you say here, you want small berries and you want concentration. However, there's a big movement now for what people will say, ask for massal selection, where actually you want some diversity in your vineyard, because if you have just the same thing, maybe one year something will happen that particular clone can't deal with very well. And a little bit of diversity in a vineyard can often be a great thing. So some people will want to plant one clone because they'll want to think they have more control over what they're getting. But other people now are moving towards this less monoculture, dare I say, and more diversity in their vineyard. So it's a very interesting and quite divisive subject. But clones are important. And if you're in certain areas, you will want, you know, if you might be susceptible to frost or a certain disease, then a clone can be a great tool to counteract those things. So it's an interesting, it's interesting for some people, it's interesting for me, but it's a big subject.
So just cutting back quickly to what James is trying to do in this range, he's got a range of noble wines. Currently, United Cellars has the Chardonnay and the Cab Sav, and yeah, he's chosen specific clones. The 337 is well known in Bordeaux as being one of the very good clones of Cabernet Sauvignon, and you'll hear it getting banded around, especially in New Zealand, a lot more. Like you were saying, Mark, about Pinot Noir. Things like the Dijon clone, and they've got different numbers depending on who's categorizing them and what have you. But yeah, it's a, like you were saying, Ali, it's something that we get pretty excited about, and so yeah, we'll see.
It's
very, very cool. Yeah, we have one here in Australia in Pinot Noir called MV6, which means Mother Vine 6, and it was basically every single Pinot Noir that was in Australia for many years. It all came from one single vine, which is quite incredible.
Yeah, it is incredible.
So just a bit of feedback from our customers here. So the UC office has said a lot more oak influence, which I definitely got. Spicier, silky mid palate, which is a great call. There is always good Cabernet, especially, always has a lovely, elegant, soft, silky mid palate. It's kind of like silk on the tongue. And I'm glad you guys are seeing that. Liz has said a step up from the Lapis, more going on, more subtle, balanced, and very yum. And then Mike has said more concentrated, very fine tannins, and of course acidity, but it's too oaky for you, which is totally fair. That's honestly, when I'm doing dry tasting notes, if I'm writing about, as I just said, if I'm writing about California, and that can be Chardonnay, that can be Pinot Noir, Cabernet, Zinfandel, usually the first thing I talk about is oak. It's very popular in the US. Let's say that.
It is. It goes with their sort of quite brash character. I say, you know, they do want these bold. They do want that showy, polished character that oak can give you. I mean, we generalize, but you know, there has been a diving back in oak. But oak has traditionally, as Mark says, factored very heavily, Mike, in California wines, be it Chardonnay, be it Cabernet, be it whatever. They're reining it in a bit, but not always. Not always.
yeah, a little bit. So Okay, so that will take us now to our third final wine for this evening, the Robert Hall Cabernet from Paso Robles. Now, I'm just going to take the screen and go back here to go back to the map, and then I will leave it to you, T. You can run us through the flavors.
Yeah, so as you were saying, it's from a different region now. We're moving to Paso Roble or Paso Robles, depending on how Americanized you are and where you're living. But this region definitely is on the up and up for being its own specific. In the United States, they call it AVA. It's similar, I guess the easiest way to relate it would be like Italy or France when you've got DOCs in different regions. But Paso Roble or Paso Robles is a region on the up and up, which you're zooming in on now. Very cool. And the winemaker there, Don Brady, has been doing some amazing things. He was actually on the committee to make this its own specific region, and he was one of the first guys to kind of recognize how good the wines were that were coming out of the region. Again, very similar, I guess, to a lot of regions along the California coast there. Really hot days with this good coastal breeze. But this one is quite, it's about halfway between, I think, LA and San Fran, I think, from memory on the map.
Yeah.
How far from Napa were you saying? So Napa's, we'll zoom out later and I'll show you. And anyway, Don Brady, yeah, he was one of the guys to really make Paso Robles what it is. He was winemaker of the year out of all of America, and he's won some very cool awards, as has this wine. On this wine, obviously, as Liz noticed, we are going up and up in the different styles. This one is a lot deeper and a lot more masculine and serious. I think it's got quite a big nose, but not aggressive. It's got like nice cease and black currant flavors going on. Yeah, very Franc-esque in the nose. The guys were just saying it's kind of like a Cab Franc. And then on the palate, this real nice cedar, spice, cocoa, more chocolatey than the other. I think they're getting more chocolatey as they go. And these very smooth, velvety tannins, which is something that Don does very well in making these very refined and polished wines. We have had his Zinfandel before, and we're just landing a little bit more of his Chardonnay. But this is our kind of go-to for a very expressive Californian cab without being too overcooked or too high alcohol or too jammy or whatever.
Very Bordeaux on the nose.
Very cool.
Bordeaux on the nose. Good.
So just from my 2 cents in this one, thank you very much, Ted. That was very good. I had, as I was saying before, I've had the great pleasure of driving through a lot of this area. So I actually spent a couple of weeks driving through all of the wine regions from San Francisco down to Los Angeles, and there are quite a few along the way. I can attest to that. And one of my favorites was Paso Robles, and part of the reason why it's grown, they've grown grapes around there for a very, very long time, but for a very long time, for the majority of its history, in fact, that it was never really taken seriously as a major wine region or an important wine region. Everyone tended to look towards Napa or Lodi, or even further north towards Sonoma or places like that. Whereas Paso Robles is more, there are a lot of young winemakers around there that are making some more interesting wines within the climate of the region. If I could just point out here one thing, we've got just down the road is a place called San Luis Obispo, which is another very cool wine region. By that I mean very funky, very up and coming. And San Luis Obispo is actually a university town, and there is a very quickly growing viticulture and winemaking degree that you can do at the university around there. So a lot of the young up and coming, the future winemakers will grow grapes or work in wineries in the direct surrounds, and a lot of that includes Paso Robles. So it's one of these areas that I really loved when I was there, and I thought, why isn't there not more things coming? But more and more and more, we're seeing wines from this area becoming more and more and more popular and more cool and more mainstream, which is great to see. So I'm very, very glad we've got this wine.
It's had a good resurgence, hasn't it? As you say, Mark, and rightly so. We've seen some fantastic wines coming from Paso Robles over here, and much like Lodi, it was, historically it was a Zinfandel area, and then it became quite famous for the Rhone grape varieties. So it had a lot of Syrah, some Grenache, Viognier, and the likes. It did well. And what it does, as you're having been around there, Mark, there's more altitude to play with here than more than Lodi, which, and as we know, altitude is really important for the structure of a wine, because the higher you go up, you get warm days, but you get cooler night times, which means that you retain more of that acidity. You'll probably have a finer grain of tannin in this wine as well. And historically it was the center of the Wild West, wasn't it? I think James Dean died in Paso Robles as well, but also it was where where I think Jesse James went, or that really was the heart of the den of iniquity of the Wild West. And it's again, we can look at Napa and these silly prices, and they are silly prices that people are charging and paying for the Cabernets there. But Cabernet actually has, I think, about 40% of the vineyard total now in Paso Robles, where before it was much more dominated by Zinfandel and by the Rhone varieties. And people have seen actually the potential for very high class Cabernet around there is great. They've got all sorts of aspects to play with, and the Cabernets I've had from Paso Robles I've been really, really impressed with as well, much like Lodi. And it's so important to look for these. We know price is so important for us as consumers, that you can get great value wines, not just going to Napa. So you picked some great areas to highlight tonight, actually, what price value for money you can get in California.
Yeah, like I said, these are exclusive wines that we're pretty proud to have on board, because they are relatively unknown. People go to Napa or they go to Sonoma, and this Paso Robles was the Wild West. It was a crazy time. But yeah, no, very cool. Beautiful tasting note from Liz on there. But I was just going to add to that. Yeah, it's got this really nice kind of red capsicum, kind of that graphite dry finish that you get kind of in the gums, and you just want to keep having a little bit more, having some food with it or something like that. So yeah, awesome.
Yeah, very great tasting note here. So yeah, clearly moved on from Lodi. This is from Liz. Smoky barbecue, fading to tobacco on the nose. I definitely get that. Cherry chocolate, yeah, that kind of cherry ripe I really get, definitely. And some ash, and that smoky metal is that kind of, I get like metal shop, like burnt metal shards, yeah. And one to savor, definitely. And then the UC office, from the nose alone, ticks the boxes. Smoky sweet spices, cassis, pirate ship rum barrel notes. Nice.
I like that, and I think that there's some great classic sort of warmer climate Cabernet tasting notes there, as you say, Liz. Your tobacco, the cherry, the chocolate, that ash that you do get with great Cabernet all over the world. That sort of earthy, ashy character, and then we've got cassis and sweet spices. Are really ticking off the boxes, as you say, in team, of what you want from New World Cabernet, from Californian Cabernet. So some cool tasty notes there.
Yeah, and I think some makes them ready to drink. We're so used, well, most of us are used to having these big French heavy hitters that you have to put down for years and years and years before they're approachable. This one, you're 2016 and already drinking beautifully right now. So
yeah, very much agree. So T, did you want to talk anything more about where we are here, or did you just want to show people kind of where we are?
Yeah, just quickly showing people where we are in relation to a few of the, obviously LA down the bottom there, Sonoma more towards the top, and unfortunately all these places at the moment are having a bit of a hell of a time, just like Australia was earlier in the year with wildfires and what have you.
Yeah, that's a good. But we had to put a little piece on this because, and I was giggling a little bit knowing what was coming up here when there was a lot of commentary in the tasting notes on kind of ash tar smoke, and I can see that those flavors are not going anywhere in California.
I've got to say, it's awful, isn't it? I saw yesterday morning the map of fires that are currently raging. Obviously, Oregon has been really badly hit, tragically. But it's not just Oregon; it's all up that coast. And you guys know, obviously, from Australia, Mark, and when I was there with you last year, and I was there just at the beginning of the fires, and then obviously it turned into something terrible. I've seen it in Chile as well in 2017, just crazy fires. It's increasingly a real issue, and very, very sad to see where we are at the moment in California.
Yeah, it's going to be one of the big challenges, I think, for for California and Australia, most definitely. I mean, I know from our perspective here, New South Wales will produce, the state of New South Wales, which is where Sydney is based in the centre of, will produce 5% of its annual production this year. So, the Hunter Valley was absolutely decimated. The Canberra region will produce not one wine this year.
And how much of that, Mark, is because of smoke taint, or how much is that the main reason why the grapes are just too tainted?
So good question. We were very lucky in the fact that there weren't actually that many vineyards that were physically destroyed by fire. The Adelaide Hills in South Australia had 30% of their vineyards actually destroyed by fire, and they've had to be rebuilt. But the vast majority throughout New South Wales, there were very few. There was a handful in the Hunter Valley that got singed, and the vines, it's kind of touch and go whether they'll survive or not. But by and large, it has been smoke taint, which is the absolute reason why there will be no wines coming out from a lot of Australian regions this year, because it's and in all honesty, this isn't something that's new to us in Australia.
No.
I think you guys in New Zealand will see a little bit more of it. I remember sending tea back in, this was in, was it in potentially, I think it was December. I sent you an image of the smoke that was going from Australia across to New Zealand. It was just sharing the love of smoke to your vineyards up in Waiheke. So
I think I remember I saw that as well, Mark. But I think smoke taint is a really interesting one because certain people, if a wine is smoke tainted, it does often smell of, as you've seen here. For me, it's ash is the key thing, and for some people, they can be extremely sensitive to that. I personally am very, very sensitive to it. So a little bit of a smoke taint for me does overpower the wine. However, there's a lot of people, and I had this with my friends who are growers in Chile, very small growers who only have several hectares, and their grapes from 2017 were smoke tainted. Their wines were smoke tainted. And they said to me, look, Ali, for me, I don't consider it a fault. It's just a characteristic of that vintage, which is a very positive way of looking at it. Just saying it's part of the vintage condition. And these guys, they don't have anything else. They don't have any other income. So they were saying, should we sell them? Should we not? And it's a very difficult thing to answer because I think the wines are overpowered by it. But then equally, my partner Aspen, she quite likes. I've put quite a lot of smoke tainted wines in front of her, and she'll say, "Oh, that's lovely and smoky," and she likes it. So certain people actually quite like that smoky character. It's a really difficult one commercially for people to know exactly what to do. But as you said here, I've had wines from vineyards that are very close to each other, that some are smoke tainted, some are not, and a lot can have to do with the way the wind is blowing. Does the smoke get to those vineyards? Does it not? And there's a lot of people working on ways of removing that smoke taint from wines as well through various methods. But it's an very unfortunate characteristic. It's getting worse.
I think there's a couple of things there that oftentimes when you have a smoky wine, it won't be smoke taint. That's the characteristic of the wine. Like some of the tasting notes on this were quite smoky and ashy, but they're not smoke tainted. And then the other side of it is that generally speaking, a winemaker won't release a wine that he knows has got smoke taint on it. So it's something that the consumers don't really have to worry about in so much as it affects the wineries big time. They shouldn't be kind of terrified that all the wines coming from this year from California are all going to be horrible. It's and especially because we taste all the wines as well first.
Yeah. Now, did I just see? I think I just saw the Parker family there smelling some barbecue sauce to get the smoke. Yeah, I did. I was smelling some barbecue sauce there to get the smoke taint.
Trying to get
that
smoke.
smoky aroma.
I like it. It's a good way to do it. And I think as well, something that T you just touched on there is it is very true. A lot of wines do taste smoky, and let's look at. I know we're talking about Cabernet today, but if you look at Syrah or Shiraz as you call it in Australia. Then that is a great variety that is naturally what they call reductive, and it can have some really smoky charred meat characteristics to it, and that's nothing to do with smoke taint. It's really an inherent part of the grape variety itself. So no, every time you smell something like smoke, it doesn't mean it's anything to do with smoke taint, and there's quite a difference between the marked ashy smoke taint. But as you say, as T says, the winemakers that are farming on a large scale, and that they really will not tend to release any of these wines that are tainted by smoke. And certainly it's something that we would taste through and make sure that wouldn't happen with our wines. But I've got to just see a question from Liz about, can you blend across years to reduce the taint? You can, absolutely. And what some of the tactics I know that people will do is they will sell off their tainted grapes for being blended to Tetra Pak wines in Chile, for instance, so for very low market wines. You can blend across years to reduce taint. However, it will probably still come through a little bit, but there are ways you can do that. They're currently working on more technical ways. I don't know what it is of being able to remove it somehow with chemicals or with some kind of thing. But you could do that, but it's still a risk. And there's just different levels of how tainted the wine is. But that is a way of doing it. Yeah, good question, Liz.
So I have a couple of friends who work at the Australian Wine Research Institute, which is fortunately and unfortunately, it is the global leader in research into smoke taint for fairly obvious reasons. And some of the research coming out says that basically, Liz, you've definitely hit the nail on the head there. Basically, the only method that we have of reducing smoke taint's effect is by blending it down. The human palate has a minimum level of detection, and some people like Ali are more sensitive and have a lower threshold for detection. However, by and large, there is a kind of a moderate or an average amount of detection that we are willing to sell wines at. That's currently being legislated, actually, interestingly enough, after the year that we've just had. And so therefore, and the way it's measured, just so you all know, the way it's measured is in parts per million. So the detection threshold, I believe, it sits somewhere between 14 and 20 parts per million, I believe it is, off the top of my head. Ali, please tell me if I'm wrong here, but it really is. It is absolutely tiny. You think of between 14 and 20 parts per million, it is tiny. And unfortunately, in some areas in New South Wales, so I know the Central Ranges area of New South Wales, which was quite seriously hit by smoke, they had smoke in their vineyards for 45 days. They had something like 400 parts per million in the grapes. So there is no amount of blending you're going to be doing that'll be anywhere near worthwhile to bring the total under 14 parts per million. So one little strategy that I can tell you guys, you can definitely keep an eye out for in future. There's a few distilleries in and around Australia. So one's Four Pillars in Victoria, and Archie Rose in New South Wales are making smoky Shiraz gin. Keep an eye out for it. It's meant to be very, very good.
I heard about that actually. And they're doing other things as well as gin, aren't they? I have. But why not? You know, we've got to be innovative. We've got to start looking at doing other things, and a bit more innovation in the wine industry as well is not a bad thing. So
yeah, for a lot of guys that I know working in one vineyard we work quite closely with, Huntington Estate in Orange, they sold all their wines to Archie Rose, all their grapes to Archie Rose, and it's not that they made any money off it, but it's that they didn't lose money for an entire crop. You know, it's kind of just staying above water. So.
That's the key. That is the key. And it's very difficult for these guys. As I said, wine is a business, and it's so important to remember wine is a business. These guys have got to make money, but they want to look after their consumers, and it's damaging as well to for their consumers to have wines that are tainted badly. So it's hard on those guys. Have we got any more questions from anyone before we look to?
Just a few more people asking to, saying thanks for traveling to the other side of the world. We're very happy to take you far away, as far away as we can in these times. We try and do it as much as we can. And that pretty much wraps us up for time. So I just want to say, if anyone's got any final questions, please do let us know. But I think everyone's pretty much asked all their questions. Loved all of your tasting notes. They were fantastic. Really, really appreciate them. Love the feedback on it. And everyone, I'm feeling quite self-conscious here. Everyone's tasting notes were bang on. I need to watch what I'm saying as you group.
Very impressive. Yeah, I like
absolutely beautiful tasting notes, and really cool to see what you guys think about the wines and share that with us, so that we get your tastes as well. And thank you for joining. And what's our next one's coming up? Here we go. So the next one coming up is the Kaiyo whiskey. This is a Japanese whiskey coming for the whiskey lovers. And then we're going to start getting into the champagne as it gets closer to Christmas. But yeah, stay tuned. There'll definitely be more coming throughout the next few months.
Beautiful. Thank you, T. Thank you for hosting, mate. Ali, thank you so much for joining us. It's been great to get your insight.
Well, thank you all. Great to be here, and that was fun. Even for me, without the wines, I feel like I tasted them through the power of the internet into your home. But that's the thing, they're exclusive wines that are so exclusive that even I can't get hold of them. So you're very lucky. You're very lucky.
We'll hook you up next time, Ali. I swear. I promise.
It's okay. It's fine. Do you know what? Sometimes it's really interesting to honestly to do it this way, and to get this feedback, and all of these tick the boxes of what I was expecting you guys to say anyway. So a lot of fun.
Beautiful. And thank you, of course, to all of our participants this evening. Thank you for coming, and we look forward to seeing you at another one soon.